Hello, my beautiful buds. Welcome back to my channel, Sprouts with Joy. My name is Joy, and if you like to talk about plants, you're in the right place. I have been very hesitant to make plant care videos because I'm well aware of the fact that plant care varies so much from person to person, from household to household, depending on what your environment is like, how much experience you have, kind of your plant parenting style, and just your personality in general. So it's a little bit challenging to offer advice that is going to work perfectly for everybody. However, I have noticed some people on the internet here and there struggling a little bit. Not everyone, obviously. I mean, it's not like an epidemic, but just like some people struggle with the begonia maculata wightii. And if you're watching this video, chances are you have either like just gotten this plant, or you are really struggling with it and you don't know what's going on and you just really would like some help, some helpful tips, that sort of thing. Or you're just like a really loyal viewer of my channel. In which case, thank you, I love you, that's really sweet. But in any case, I've been thinking a lot. I've been letting a lot of like thoughts marinate in my mind because for whatever reason, this begonia maculata wightii really likes me. It really likes what I've been doing, and I found a lot of success with the plant, and I just kind of wanted to like throw these things onto the internet, these little tips and tidbits that I found have helped me in my journey with this plant. I got my first begonia maculata wightii in Florida in October of 2021, which like almost 2 years ago at this point, which is insane. I got it at a little store called Tropic Plants, which is a store that's pretty like close to where I grew up, and I packed it into my little checked bag and I brought it home with me, and this is what it looked like at that time. It was just a little baby with like just 1 or 2 little stalks in it, and then it grew to be absolutely massive, almost as tall as I was, like I don't know, 4 feet, 5 feet, something just absurd. And so I chopped it down a lot, but like not all the way because I was a little bit afraid of, I had never propagated it before, so I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And then I was really successful in propagating it, and I actually made this pot that I have now that has like 1, 2, 3, it has like 5 stalks in it, like essentially like 5 separate plants in one pot. So it's really nice and full and bushy and beautiful, and these have been growing really, really nicely. So yeah, once this was like really well established, I went ahead and completely chopped up the mother plant like all the way, and I actually have quite a few propagations of those that I intend to give away to friends and sell, and you know, this, that, and the other. But the point is, I have quite a lot of history with this plant, and I've been able to successfully grow it a lot. Oh, and the reason that I chopped up the mother plant in the first place was that it was like super, super gangly and like, which is, I'm going to talk about that later. So
I do want to add the disclaimer that I'm not a botanist, I am not an expert by any means. I'm just a girl that has a lot of plants, and I've happened to have a really good experience with this one, and I just, these things have worked for me, so maybe they'll work for you, I don't know.
The first category that I'm going to be talking about is watering. I mean, watering is like one of the most basic plant care things. Even if this is literally your first plant ever, I'm like 95% certain, you know, there's a little 5% that I'm like, but I'm like 95% certain that you know you're gonna need to water your plant. Don't water it every day.
No.
Some people like to water their plants on a schedule, but honestly, I personally recommend just sticking your finger in the soil, feeling it, you know, maybe like halfway up your finger, and if it's like really dry and you lift up the pot and it's also dry and you know that it's been maybe like at least 5 days to a week since you've watered the plant, you know, there are some context clues there, then yeah, you should water it. For some people, watering on a schedule happens to work for them. It just won't always work successfully because there is risk of root rot if the plant is moist too consistently, or if it dries out and gets bone dry too much and then the roots dry up, and then the next time you water it, they're like, oopsie, we don't exist anymore, and they just die. And the reason that watering on a schedule won't always work is that your conditions in your home will probably change throughout the year in terms of like how humid it is, what the temperature is, therefore how quickly your soil is going to dry out. I mean, you can have like a loose general schedule in your mind. Like I know that I usually water this plant on this certain day, but always check before you water because you never know. And also like if you repot the plant, that's also going to completely change up your watering schedule because of the volume of the soil compared to the roots and all those things. This plant is not incredibly vocal when it comes to whether or not it needs to be watered. And what I mean by that is if you feel the leaves of some plants or you like look at some plants, a lot of philodendron tends to do this, and especially stuff like peace lilies and whatever, like they will visibly droop, or when you touch them, the leaves will be like really soft compared to what they normally are. With Hoya, their leaves will start getting wrinkly. And that's like a point of stress for the plant, so you don't necessarily want to let plant consistently get to that point. However, it is a very clear indicator.
Oh, that plant needs water.
I've noticed that the begonia maculata wightii doesn't do that as dramatically. Like it will sometimes, but like once it gets to that point, it's already unhappy. So if you let it get to the point where it visibly needs water, it's gonna throw a tantrum, it's gonna get crispy leaves, it's gonna lose leaves. So I highly recommend being super consistent with watering this plant. And in that regard, you know, it might be considered kind of high maintenance because it's not super forgiving if you miss a watering. And I honestly have let this plant go like 10 days without water and it was okay. Like it lost like a bottom leaf, but you know, it was generally fine. But if you like completely forget about this plant for like weeks on end, my guess is that it's not going to last very long. And I believe the reason for that is its root system is very delicate. If you ever propagate it like in water, you'll notice they're super stringy and the leaves are like slightly succulent, slightly thick, but nowhere near as thick as something like a Hoya, for example. Like those leaves tends to be pretty chunky.
Unless it happens to be like a Hoya multiflora or something like that.
And so those leaves can retain a lot of water, which makes Hoya slightly more drought tolerant, even though their roots are also kind of fine. But this plant doesn't retain a ton of water. Like it has thick stems. So, you know, it's not the most delicate plant, like it's not a fern or anything, but it's gonna need to be watered pretty consistently. But anyway, now that we're talking about the root system, I'll get into repotting and that sort of thing. I think one of the most important things for this plant, and the reason that I've had so much success with it, is that it prefers to be in plastic or in ceramic, not terracotta. And if it is in plastic, make sure it's not a plastic that has like a ton of holes all around it, like those orchid pots. Like make sure it's going to retain at least some moisture, because again, this plant does not like to dry out quickly. It likes to have a little bit of moisture, although it doesn't want to like be sitting in water. It doesn't want to be soggy, so you want to be careful about that. But generally speaking, I have found the most success with having a soil that is like nice and chunky and aerated. Most plants, honestly the majority of plants, will do much better if they have chunky soil rather than soil that's really dense and is going to get really compact around the roots and eventually kind of suffocate them. But even though it does have that chunkier mix or airier mix, you want it to be, this is very important, so I'm reiterating a lot, you want it to be in a pot that is not going to be too porous or dry out too quickly. And terracotta is a pot that really dries out quickly, which works super well for a lot of plants. But begonia in general, I think they appreciate some moisture, they appreciate humidity, stuff like that. Okay, and I do want to come on here and say, even if you are using terracotta, if it's working for you, you don't have to go from terracotta to plastic or to ceramic or whatever with your begonia just because I said so. There are literally so many factors to success with this plant. Like maybe you water your plants more frequently than I do, and so it works. Or maybe you have a completely different soil mix that retains more moisture, and so it works. Or maybe you live in Florida where you can get away with a lot more. So much goes into whether or not our plants are happy. I just think that this is something that works for me. This is what I've done, and I have reasons for why I do what I do, but obviously it's not going to be the same for everyone. I don't want you to like freak out if your plant's in terracotta Like if it's doing well, like you don't have to change anything. Speaking of which, I actually definitely need to like put this in a cache pot or a cover pot because this is just like a nursery pot and it's like a little bit, but it's covered by some other plants, so I don't really notice all the time, but oh well. Another thing is when you do repot this plant, which I don't feel like this plant needs to be repotted all that often. Like the roots don't go super crazy. I mean, they grow, but like I said, like they're really thin, so they don't take up a ton of space in the pot. But once you notice that this plant is root bound, which signs of that would just be that it's drying out super quickly, roots might be coming out of the bottom of the pot. You could even just pull it out, like if it's really compact and like comes out in one piece, then you realize, yeah, it's probably root bound. And that would be a time when you would want to repot the plant, size it up by 1 inch or 2 inches in circumference. And like I said, make sure you're using a soil that is a bit chunkier and has some amendments to it, has some substance, isn't just like straight potting mix. I mean, I think that you could potentially get away with straight potting mix with this plant, but that's not what I've personally done, so I don't want to like advise that. And because the roots are so delicate, I personally have never really messed with them a whole lot. Like when I repot this plant, I literally just plop it out, put it in the pot and backfill with soil. Like I don't like loosen the roots or break into it as much because like monstera roots or even like pothos roots or anthurium roots, like those roots are so chunky. They seem to be much more resilient, but the roots for this guy are like really delicate. So like, be gentle. Humidity is another really big category for plants. Generally speaking, begonia as a genus tends to prefer more humidity than not. And in fact, begonia actually tends to be a pretty common terrarium plant for that reason. Like they love being in super high humidity. Some of them do. Although the begonia maculata wightii is specifically a cane begonia or like an angel wing begonia, which you can tell because of the shapes of the leaves. They kind of look like angel wings rather than a different shape. And because of that, I mean, it appreciates higher humidity. Like these guys have absolutely thrived in my prop boxes. But I will say, if you do have it in higher humidity, airflow is pretty important because these leaves are a little bit prone to melting if it's like way too wet in there, way too humid. Like the leaves will just dissolve. Me personally, I have this plant just in ambient humidity, which in the winter time tends to be closer to like 40%. But in the summertime, it's more like 50% humidity. So if your home is like a reasonable humidity and you're not like living in the desert, I'm sure it'll be totally fine in ambient humidity. And even if your home is really low in humidity and you don't feel like running a humidifier, I don't know, I feel like as long as you water this consistently, you can probably get away with not that much humidity. I think actually what's more important than a lot of humidity is just consistent humidity, because I have noticed that if I have this plant in a prop box and I remove it from the prop box, sometimes it goes into shock and the leaves will get really crispy. In terms of light, I mean, light is another really big category when it comes to taking care of your plants. And I personally have my begonia maculata wightii under a grow light, and in its current position under the grow light, it gets somewhere between 250 and 300 foot candles for 12 hours a day. Sorry, my son is joining us because he's really cranky right now. And he just wants to be held by mama. So that's what we're doing. Anyway, talking about light. So yeah, I would classify that light category as roughly medium light, or maybe the equivalent of like being pulled back from an east-facing window by a few feet. But I do know that this plant can handle higher light than that, because when I had the absolutely massive plant, it was reaching up really close to the grow light, which was approaching like 1,000 foot candles, and it was really loving that. Medium light I think is more than adequate to get a plant that's like this. It's growing, it's got new growth, it's really happy, it's consistent, but it's like not growing way too quickly or like going crazy or getting bleached out or anything like that. Like it has this really rich color to it. So yeah, I'd say medium light is more than adequate, but if you want to go for like bright and direct light, I mean, I'm not going to stop you. Another tip that's very specific to this plant, not this plant, but this plant. That was a stupid joke. Another tip that's specific to this plant is just that tends to go a little bit crazy. It can get really leggy if it's growing towards the light super quickly. By leggy, I mean like stretched out. Yeah, you like the plant, don't you? It's really cool. So there will be more stem than leaf if it gets super leggy. And this plant can branch out and just grow in really interesting and bizarre ways, which if that's your look and that's your aesthetic and you want it to do that, absolutely go for it. I prefer my plants to be a little bit more compact and bushy and kind of manicured and controlled. So I would definitely recommend pruning it regularly. Like if it starts to get more leggy, I mean, just chop that baby up, propagate it. You can always add it back into the pot if you don't have a very bushy plant yet. These guys are super easy to propagate, which I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, a trellis is gonna be your best friend. I haven't actually attached this one to the trellis yet because I just haven't, and I feel like it doesn't quite need it yet. But over time, if your plant does get super tall, having some sort of a trellis or bamboo stakes or something along those lines, along with, you could attach it with twine or like twisty ties, or plant velcro tends to be my medium of choice. And that will just keep it from flopping around. I mean, again, these guys can get really tall and kind of unstable. And if you're like picking it up and taking it to the sink, and you know, I don't want it to get too top heavy on you because then it could like just completely fall over, and that, you know, you don't want that. And then as far as propagating goes, I mean, I've personally found this plant to be so easy to propagate, especially because you can cut it at a lot of different points. Like you could just cut off only a leaf and kind of stick that leaf face up in the soil. And I've had entire plants grow from a single leaf. It takes a lot longer, but like it'll root into the soil, and you know, you can definitely do that. Or you can chop it from like here, like it'll grow roots from, okay, these little hands. I'm gonna try to find examples from other videos I've made, because I have at least 2 videos where I propagated this plant and kind of showed the process. So I can also link those down below. But my favorite way to do it is to just like chop at any point in the stem where I feel like, and it'll just grow roots. I've propagated it in water, I've propagated it in sphagnum moss, I've propagated it in perlite and in soil, and it's all been successful. I think the propagation tends to go quicker if you do put it in some sort of a prop box or a high humidity situation, but you could also just have it propagate in water. Yes, you're really engaging in this conversation, aren't you? He's just happy now that I'm holding him. Obviously, the simplest way would just to stick it in water and let it grow that way. You know, you just get like some sort of a vessel, fill it with water, snip, snip, and just stick them in water, and there you go. It's really not that complicated. Some people seem to have struggled with propagating it. I don't really understand why, because I've actually never had a failed propagation of this plant. I've made dozens at this point. I've made dozens of little plants that I've given away, and I have a lot that are still in my prop boxes that I need to sell or something. Oh, as far as fertilizer goes, I mean, I hope that you're fertilizing your plants. I would definitely just recommend fertilizing it, probably like any of your other plants. I don't notice anything wildly different with it. I usually fertilize my plants with an organic fertilizer about once a month, but you just kind of pick your fertilizer of choice and make sure you're consistent with it, and it'll probably thank you for it. Well, I think that's pretty much it for all like the specific tips that I have for this plant. I gotta attend to this guy because he apparently really would like Mama's attention. Yeah. He's only in a diaper, by the way, because it is exceedingly hot today and he is a furnace. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to leave a like, comment. Again, if you have any questions, do leave a comment down below, and I'm sure I, or like anyone else that has had this plant like in the community, would love to answer you. If you want to watch more of my content, please subscribe if you want to. And yeah, I hope that you have a wonderful and blessed day. Bye-bye!